Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Eclipse Evolution. I'm your host, Savannah Rose. I am so thrilled to introduce a very special guest today, Mark Walsh. We've connected online. I've been a big fan of his work. He's truly remarkable, and I am so grateful to share his message with you all today. And so, Mark, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to go ahead and pass you the mic. I would love to just have you give an overview of who you are and all the beautiful things that you do.
Okay, my name is Mark Walsh. I'm currently very happy to have a coffee, having just come back from a long trip to Amsterdam where I've been teaching. So I teach embodiment coaches. We can say what that is in a minute, maybe. So that's my main job. I also supervise a trauma charity in Ukraine, and I'm responsible for a YouTube channel that helps young men learn about themselves and find purpose through the gym. What all those things have in common is embodiment. So yeah, that's what I'm most known for.
I love it. I love it. And I just respect your broad array of service to everyone because I think embodiment is a topic that is growing in awareness and relevance, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a disembodied world. That's, been increasingly the case. Some people say since agriculture, certainly since industrialization, definitely since the technological revolution of the information age. I think what I see around the world is people who are burnt out, distracted, disconnected, usually lacking purpose. Now, of course, there are beautiful islands of exception, but if we look at the sort of mainstream culture, it's a disembodied one, and that has certain consequences that are fairly apocalyptic. So I think it's good that many people like myself are doing something about that.
Absolutely. Yes. I love a light worker in action for sure. I'm curious because when I was exploring and have been learning about you, you've shared so openly about your own journey and how your own discovery and practice of embodiment has shaped so much in your life from your marriage to recovery and addiction worlds. I'm just so curious, like, what got you started in exploring this work?
Yeah, I mean, my own story is very similar to that of Western civilizations. It's analogous, if that doesn't sound too grandiose, in that I was hyper-cognitive as a kid. So I read all the books in the school library and started borrowing books from Cambridge University Library, which is the sort of nearest university to where I grew up. And I was pretty troubled, even though I was very cognitively clever and learning a lot of information. I ended up having addiction issues, just like my dad. I grew up in an alcoholic household, some trauma issues, and just was troubled and found that you can't read your way out of that. It's like if somebody said they read a lot of good books on kissing, that wouldn't be a great qualification. That's the mistake Western civilization makes, essentially, is it thinks that learning about things is the only way to know and doesn't really have a model for wisdom or character development. So then when I went to university, I dived into, I did psychology at university, but I kind of went, hang on a minute, I don't think the answer to my troubles is in the library. I distinctly remember going in the library and going, you know what, I have to read books in here, and that's fine, it's good to read books, but I don't really think the answers are here. And luckily I also walked into an Aikido school, a dojo, and that was the sort of beginning of my journey that then went into conscious dance and meditation and yoga and all sorts of other what I would now call embodied practices.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it sounds like, and just from what I was exploring with your feral philosophy channel and everything, just how the body and movement is so important. Movement, and it sounds like breath is so important to tap into with embodiment.
Yeah, I mean, we're not just cognitive animals, right? If you think of why you're in love with someone or why you like your job, these are not simply logical questions. It's not something we work out on an Excel spreadsheet logically, that we are embodied emotional animals. And this is something that's worth discovering and developing, that we can develop ourselves through the body, which was a classical Greek idea and is a modern, Japanese idea. It's not weird in Asia to have that concept of developing oneself through martial arts or yoga or something. I think increasingly those ideas have come to the West through mindfulness, and those ideas have also been independently developed in the West, things like body therapy or improv, there's different traditions of embodiment that are now sort of colliding in this wonderful age where they're very available to us for the first time. So my life has been a sort of feast of embracing those practices and learning those practices and then spreading them to others just in very different ways, in corporate world, a lot of coaches I train, as I mentioned, and then, in war zones and with young men in the gym even, because, the average young guy isn't going to do yoga, but he lifts weights. So we use that as the in, as it were.
Right, right. Absolutely. I'm curious when you're describing embodiment and how it's something that
Yeah.
is really having a full circle moment right now, where it's something that was such a part of our culture, such a part of our daily life, and then these things have come as we've advanced, but have more so lost touch with really what makes us human in a lot of ways. Like where I know you've said something where we're not just like these meat suits. I love that quote. So I think that's so important. What would you identify as some of the key resistance points to embodiment that you've observed?
Yeah, so the destruction of what we could call the village. So the sort of without idealizing our past, I think there's a tendency amongst more New Age communities to sort of idealize tribal people who, might have been cannibals, for example, or, might have burnt their enemies alive, or, the Aztecs ripped out their hearts or something. So, we might want to be a little bit cautious of idealization. But what we have lost is in modernity is the village. So that's the social support network. Like, if my partner and I are thinking about having children, it's like that's very different now compared to even in the 50s, let alone in many years before that. And I think that's how we stay in our bodies is through that network of community. I think the second one is ecocide, the destruction of the environment and a lack of connection to that. Someone like Josh Schry, whose excellent podcast, The Emerald, kind of, talks about the animist tendencies we had in our past kind of connection to the natural world. And the lack of meaning. So Nietzsche pointed to this. Was a sort of Nietzsche said God is dead and we have killed him, and it wasn't a celebration. It was a commiseration. He said, "What are we going to do now?" Almost right if we don't have this sense of spirituality. So what are the attempts to cope with this? Well, there are some attempts for online community that really work. There are attempts for sort of new age spirituality, which is often more of a sort of narcissistic, consumeristic misunderstanding. Let me be kind. And people find meaning in sort of pseudo religions. The woke thing that's taken over America is essentially a pseudo religion, or people's football clubs in England might be a pseudo religion. They're looking for meaning in all the wrong places. So, they're the big challenge. That's in a nutshell, we could say sort of self-disconnection through social disconnection, spirit disconnection, and ecological disconnection.
What's your vision? Like, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you want to see happen in our modern world where I agree with you, first of all. I think the village has been lost because we're living in this globalized culture now. How do you see that shifting over the next few years?
Yeah, I think we're probably going to fall into some apocalyptic Mad Max scenario, and I'll make a very good warlord. So I'm looking forward to it. No, I mean, with sort of all seriousness, I'd say I'm not known for my humility, but I would say if anyone says they have a vision for the future and they're going to make it happen, they're probably some kind of cult leader. I tend to focus more on small projects like being healthy, having buying Christmas presents for my family. This is the task this week. Having a good relationship, training some apprentices and students in something positive, and one or two small projects like the Ukraine one. I think that's probably a better point of focus than a sort of megalomaniac global vision for the future, which is far beyond my control. Though, I see there being a growth of embodiment generally. And that could be very positive. I mean, just there are green shoots, like just yoga being a popular thing. And while I may have critiques of modern postural yoga or consumer culture yoga in big cities, on the whole, that's pretty cool, right? That this thing that was really alternative is now super normal to do. It's pretty cool. I was in Austin not long ago and went to a very good yin yoga class there, and I just dropped in. It's pretty cool. So there are positive movements in the world.
Absolutely, yes. Oh, no, that makes perfect sense. I'm curious, like, what role do you see overriding, like, people's own personal overriding, whether it's through a substance or through
Yeah.
something that we have that keeps us from our own personal relationship to ourselves and that ability to embody?
Lots to say. It sounds like that's a personal one. I don't know you very well, but do you have a history of doing that
It
like most
has been in
people?
the past, for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like you've been on a journey through that, so maybe you can answer after me as well. But I'd like to hear your. I always like a conversation, so I'd like to hear your side. But I certainly see modernity as essentially a pushing, striving, driving, hard and faster, more culture. Now, I'm a sort of fairly masculine type who quite likes that, but even I've found the limits of that and had burnout, for example, overwork. I think there are many attempts to not feel in the face of whether it be our trauma or just the sort of normal emotional difficulties of life. And pushing ourselves too hard is one of them. Let's be honest, most people are self-brutalizing in some way and self-numbing in others. That has become the norm on a macro level, and even on just a small level of just pushing that feeling in the body where you're just off center slightly. And what's been your experience of this? It sounds like you've got a juicy story in there too.
Yes, well, I would say you're spot on. You have great intuition, and I think yes, when it comes down to embodiment, it was that discovery and that awareness of how much I had been overriding and masking, which led to burnout specifically, as well as just disconnection from myself, like not just my personality and who I am, but just I would say disconnection and almost like a repulsion towards my sensitivity, because I had been so conditioned that that was like too much, or that it wasn't okay, or it wasn't professional, or
No.
whatever the critiques were. And so yeah, like the overriding, I was just addicted to that hamster wheel of the very like more is more culture here. Especially, I wonder what the difference is between here and the UK, because I know in America it is just worshipped. Like it is just absolutely
You have a
worshipped to
work
be
ethic.
so
Yeah.
truly like
I mean, I've taught in about 50 countries. I'm from a cross-cultural family myself, and I'm obsessed with culture. And I've just got back actually from the States and the Netherlands most recently, which also has a very strong work ethic. The Netherlands, that sort of Dutch Calvinist ethic is essentially, New York used to be New Amsterdam, right? So you essentially inherited that sort of Calvinist work ethic. And there's definitely a sense of the body is sinful, but work is good. So let's keep pushing and driving. And there's something positive in that. I have hippie friends who could do with a bit more of that, frankly. But most people in the world are using that to abuse themselves. And in my own experience, as I said, even as someone who leans that way typologically, let alone most women I know, this is going to be a gross generalization, but modern work absolutely doesn't suit most women. And I've dealt with corporate clients from Russia and UK and America who are badass, smart, cool, tough women, and they're like the 10% who it maybe is most suited to, and that 10% are absolutely destroyed by it. It just doesn't seem to fit the female nervous system. I don't think it fit anyone's nervous system, but particularly the sort of cyclical female nervous system, as far as I can tell. And I've got female colleagues who are, more versed in this than me. But it doesn't match how any of us are wired, but particularly women.
Oh, I cannot agree more. That's been something that, because I left the corporate world a couple of years ago to go out on my own just practice and everything. And it's been just transformative being able to tune into my natural rhythms and embrace it rather than
Yeah.
just tolerate it and be like,
Right.
oh, damn, I'm on my period again. Like, I got to just buckle down and keep. Now it's like, oh, wow, this is this beautiful thing my body gets to do and I get to honor it. It's just been this huge narrative switch.
Super helpful. I've got some colleagues who are, experts in the menopause, for example, or, menarche on the other end of life for teen girls, female colleagues who do that. And my own partner will have those conversations. Where are you in your cycle? Are you coming to the gym? Like, do you want to come lift weights with me or not? Do you want to get up early and go for a walk with me or not? Like, where are you in that flow? And I mean, it's obviously there's a cycle of life. There's a cycle of the year. Like at the moment, it's November and it's just moving into December now. And as we're recording this, and a lot of my students just don't really feel like working because we're supposed to be hibernating right now. We're not supposed to have electric lights and be doing the entire time. But I've noticed that in my own life as I hit my 40s. It's like, okay, this is different than my 20s or 30s. I have to change how I work now. So these are the natural cycles and rhythms of embodiment, which are, not so simple. People might be angrily saying, you can't generalize. Of course, it's always complex. But the truth is, you can generalize. Generalizing's fun, and cycles are one way to do that relatively intelligently.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. It's so, I feel like validating and just great to hear how more awareness is being brought to just like the natural cycles of this world. Because you're so right. I think whether it was just through the Industrial Revolution or just through the internet, gosh, I mean, that has...
The tech, yeah, we could bring it up to speed with the modern age and what Tinder's doing to people and what Facebook is doing to everyone. I mean, we are being driven insane for profit by tech companies that treat us like serfs while we're surfing. There's a very modern version of that. So yeah, this is a classical conversation in some ways, but really like up to date in others.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I was just chatting with one of my dear friends about how boredom is something that we're losing because of just the constant addiction to entertainment. How we're just becoming, I say we, but there's just so much trending right now where folks are not allowing themselves to be bored anymore. Like that, the intolerance of that experience of boredom, where it used to be something that could spark creativity, or could spark just, like little kids who would just ask you why all the time, like all those the
Yeah, yeah,
questions,
yeah.
like the things where people start to uncover their own meaning behind life. It's just spoon fed to them, or maybe not so spoon fed, but I think that that's like a huge thing I've noticed with the
Awesome.
resistance perhaps to embodiment as well.
Yeah, I was coaching a young man in the gym not long ago, and just to give you an idea of where the kids are at, he's a 16-year-old ex-drug addict. So he's already been through
Wow.
some of that. I'm long-term sober myself, and then his mum said, "Hey, can you take? He doesn't listen to me anymore. Can you? He needs a man. Can you take him to the gym?" He's like, "Yep." This is how that project started. And I was in the gym with him. I said, "Look, can you turn your phone off while we're in the gym?" And the way it works when you do strength training is you do sets, right? So you do, a set of 12 or 15 or whatever, you probably know. And then you have a couple of minutes in between. And you could see him twitching and like looking around because he was so used to it. Whenever he had 1 minute, the phone would come out. And because I'd already agreed with him, like, hey, no phones in the gym. Let's give this our full focus. I thought, oh, that 1 or 2 minutes. I thought it's just a nice rest between sets. But for him, it was, you could see him looking around, twitching and looking for some stimulation because he was used to it.
Wow.
And I'm not immune to that myself. I find myself
Sure.
teaching embodiment all day and then I get a bit peopled out and I find myself lying on the couch, doom scrolling YouTube in the evening. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute, like it's a very addictive tech for the same with porn, the same with some of the social tech. And, when AI combines with some of this tech, I mean, that's probably the end of breeding and probably the end of the human race as a result. So we are going to have a very interesting few years because I think there'll become a group of people who realize this and say, let's become a bit more embodied. And they might not be totally back to nature, but I'm already seeing people like buy ranches outside of Austin and go live in the woods in Portugal. And so there will come a group of people who go, let's have a bit more community, a bit more connection. And they'll have another group of people who will like put the chip in my head and I want the brain implant. And I can see that. I was using Chat GPT the other night to look at my taxes. I was like, this is amazing. So I can totally, I was like, this is the best tax advice I've ever had. I can totally see the attraction.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, for sure. I think yeah, I find myself even at that split too where I'm fascinated, like a huge like Blade Runner fan where I'm like, "Oh wow, Black Mirror." Like I do like I don't know if I would say romanticize, but I am fascinated by the tech world and think that there can be so much good that can come from it. And you'll also find me in my hammock, blissed out, and like there's something that just does not compare even just to what's already here in front of us. And I think that's one of the huge things with embodiment is to allow ourselves to feel satisfied, because I think that's something I see with the hamster wheel is folks, that's what I call it at least.
No, I
It's
like
like
it.
that
Yeah.
constant go go go. It's like people don't know how to feel satisfied anymore, and I think as a woman that's something that is just our right as being like the yin holder, the one that is the kind of sit back and in that feminine nature aspect. That's something I see just it almost as I continue deeper in my practice has become almost alienating in a way, because I feel like trying to find and connect with people who are able to be present and have their phone away and be satisfied and have the right now be enough, and not just enough but nourishing. That is something that I think is what I hope to foster and lead hopefully too.
Nicely said. We'll have to get you on my podcast. I think we should do a swap. I can see you've already got some good stuff to say. We'll have you on the Embodiment
Yeah.
Coaching podcast. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, what leads to deep nourishment, right? So, coming home to the body. I sometimes say that. So, the coming home to ourselves, the not looking for satisfaction outside in the sort of grasping for whatever it is that's being sold to us. And what disembodiment leads to is disconnection from ourselves, like self-objectification, and then objectification with others, and that often people are used to that in a sort of sexual context, and that doesn't feel good. I remember particularly when I lived in the gay capital of England, I'd have guys kind of look at me like a piece of meat, and I'd be like, it's not great, I quite like it when a gay man compliments me in a sort of personal way, but like I don't want to be looked at that way, right? And the same way, I noticed like in the States recently, often it felt like everyone was working an angle like, what can I get from you? Kant, the philosopher, would say you become a means to an end rather than ends in itself. And this is the disembodied paradigm of everyone's just a delivery device for pleasure, that when meaning is stripped from the world, what we're left with is sort of nihilism. And we try and cope with that with narcissism and hedonism. And I've done the hedonistic experiment with drugs and sex and alcohol and any other thing I can get my hands on, and it doesn't work very well. It doesn't lead to satisfaction, as you say. It leads to diminishing returns, actually, on satisfaction. Yeah, and that becomes a hell realm, as the Buddhists would say, or a hungry ghost realm. So the idea of sort of disembodiment, it has much deeper consequences than people think. It's not simply, I'd be bad at yoga or something like that. It's a fundamental dehumanization of people.
Oh, yes. Could not agree more. And I think that's something that on my own journey has been almost, I would say, like, awakening is the word that comes to my mind, because I think it's when you start to see where you operate from, like when you operate from that place that is calcified. That's kind of how it feels, where just like that calcification of your heart, and you're operating from that bottomless pit of it's never enough, i.e. I'm never enough because I'm so disconnected from my actual desires or feelings. Yes. Or sense of worth or whatever. Like you said, if you're searching for that from other people or things or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. We say in 12-step recovery, you can't get enough of what you don't really need. So it becomes a never-ending black hole to try and fill. And, I'd say if there's a 25-year-old young man listening to this, I'd say, do that experiment. Go to Eastern Europe and, snort drugs out of hookers' cleavages. Just run that experiment thoroughly. Or maybe be wiser than me, sort of do something smarter than addiction of various kinds. I think some people are wise and they get it early. And some people like me need to be sort of thoroughly beaten before they crack and get it. But yeah, so I feel like there's the beginnings of wisdom now at 45, but nowhere near. I wish I'd had that earlier, because just a lot of suffering came from that.
Sure. But I'm sure you wouldn't change anything. At least that's how I see my journey. It's just, I think that sometimes those experiences, even when we look back and cringe, like that is important information. And I think it's so interesting for me when I look back at my own hedonistic days and just see how I don't even recognize that person. Like, yes, it's me in like the pictures, videos, whatever, if I like reflect physically, but it's that the space in which I was operating from is so different than how I'm showing up today. And that's something that I think I needed, those experiences, those crazy nights out where I should have probably been kidnapped and trafficked, like with the kind of shit I was doing. Like, it's a miracle. Oh my God. But it led me to
this is getting dark now. This is getting dark, Savannah. So
I'm just being honest.
I don't know. I wonder why I'm not dead. Certainly some of the experiences, I was still an active alcoholic while working in war zones, It's, I remember walking around Ethiopia in the dark at night, and someone behind us saying in Amharic, like, we're going to mug this guy and take his money. And, luckily I speak enough Amharic that I sort of just about understood and got my wits about me. But there's definitely been many situations like that where I've gone, yep, there, but for the grace of God, I would have gone down.
Mm-hmm. I'm so curious, just a side note, this has been on my mind, like, how have you noticed, because I'm assuming were married to your wife before you began your journey with embodiment, is that correct?
No. So okay. Slightly complex. I started embodiment, let's say 16 with yoga, more seriously at 18 with Aikido. I'm now 45. I've been married for 8 years, though I'm actually in the process of separation with my Ukrainian wife in a very amicable, friendly way. Something I don't talk about on podcasts, though in 2 or 3 years' time, I'm sure I will be. But
Yeah.
it's a sort of amicable split currently happening, and I'd probably rather not say any more about it.
Sure, absolutely. I respect that for sure. I'm curious what advice you would have for men who are looking to use embodiment as a way to, maybe not use is the right word, but touch base with themselves more to find their ideal partner. Because I think that's something that I see in this world, being someone who is very public as far as my sensuality goes. I see so many men come to me who are like, "Oh my gosh, I love you. Like you're my
Uh,
dream girl." Like, and they have these like passionate feelings for me, and I'm like, "You don't know who I am." And like, what is
right.
that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
deliberately didn't look up any of that side of you before the interview because I didn't want to relate to you, as it were, that way.
Sure.
I was quite conscious when my PA told me some of the stuff you were wrong with. I was like, okay, I'm not going to look at that. So, in terms of advice to guys, I mean, all advice is shitty, right? I mean, we have to make our own mistakes, but I tell you my own life experiences, which is trying to find a partner before you're deeply in contact with yourself and your sense of life purpose would be a mistake. So I would
Mm-hmm.
suggest that being a priority for a woman is not a solution, right? A woman is not a way to find meaning if you have none already. So I would say that. I would say for men, in terms of ideal life partner, it doesn't exist. There's only a human being that you find less repulsive and intolerable than other human beings. So I think looking for the ideal person is part of the fantasy we're sold as men, looking for that woman to put on a pedestal. I've, for example, dated the most super attractive kind of Russian model types, Ukrainian model types. I spent a lot of time in both those countries. And what you find is their shit still smells. And maybe someone looks amazing because they're all done up, and then you find out they've got weird knees, or they've got a weird smell, or something. There's always something, right? So there's no such this sort of only the ideal woman, even visually, only exists on magazine covers and on internet sites. As Cindy Crawford said, even Cindy Crawford doesn't look like Cindy Crawford. The other piece I'd say, getting in your body will make you more attractive as a man. Don't be afraid of masculine polarity. The mainstream culture is very anti-male. But in my experience, most women are not anti-men. And this is a
Mm-hmm.
big distinction. So if you listen to the mainstream culture, it will be cut your balls off, don't develop your masculinity. Liberal men are disgusting, let's be honest. Hippie men are disgusting, and become a conservative and work on your discipline and your sense of purpose and be of service to the world. Get in your body, and then you will eat. If you're like a good man, when I broke with my wife, right? I'm not amazing. I have my flaws, but I'm not tall, I'm not dark, I'm only relatively handsome, but I have a sense of purpose in life. I'm good with kids. I have, whatever, some sort of steady income. And female friends were just falling over themselves to introduce me to new people because particularly once people hit 30, there's just a shortage of solid guys. And like you can find a decent partner as a man if you just basically sort your shit out. You don't have to be a millionaire or 6 foot, tall or anything. Like just basically being solid. Like your female friends will fall over themselves to set you up with someone. So yeah, that's a bit of a rant and a ramble. Half of it was half joking, but I don't know. Anything useful, take it. If not,
Oh,
leave
for
it.
sure. Absolutely. I always say my kink is communication. That's my thing. It's in the consistency. I'm like, ooh, like there's nothing hotter than like a communicative, consistent man.
Yeah, and don't listen to what women say they want either. Watch what women do, not what women say.
Mhm.
That would be another
Mhm.
piece of advice.
Oh yeah. Oh, and that I think goes for just any gender. Truly, I think that that's something that I see so often, and maybe this is a result of the disembodiment. Is people's word doesn't mean anything anymore. It's
Mm,
really just, at least to me, and I know that's a generalization, but it's the actions. I say actions are what put food on the table. That's what keeps you warm at night, and
yeah,
it's
nice.
true. People can talk and say
Yeah,
anything.
people can say they love you while hitting you, right? Like
Mhm.
abusive partners have done that. Take an extreme example, and most words. including from personal growth speakers, so watch out for people like me who are selling something, watch out, is more like a replication of memes. It's more like PR or advertising. Most of what people say is simply what is socially convenient. And, you see this in personal growth, right? Someone will say something like, neurons that fire together, wire together. And everyone will go, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, motherfucker, that just rhymes. It's like, it's just replicating because it rhymes. Maybe there's something behind it and some use and some neuroscience behind it. But it's like, dude, it just sounds good. So be careful of the seduction of words.
I'm curious, this is a little, I guess, like shift, but I'm curious what your philosophy is on the avoidance of fear that humans tend to have and the connection to disembodiment. Because I feel like fear is something that is such a huge driver behind whether it is overriding or masking or even just something else that keeps us disembodied. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on fear.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been probably the emotion I've disembodied the most, that I've ignored the most in my own life. So I speak from semi-incompetence with any response. I mean, think about it. Let's just take it more broad. Every culture and every individual says certain emotions aren't allowed. So maybe you're from a nice family, you become a people pleaser, or a nice culture, and you're not allowed to be angry. It's very British, for example. Or in Brazil, you're not allowed to be sad. Don't bring the party down, man. Don't be sad. Japan, again, anger, different ones. And, anything you're ignoring is going to come out sideways and run the show in a different way, right? So for me, I was saying I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of anything. And I was actually almost counterphobic, going to work in war zones and doing martial arts and doing all these sort of scary, crazy things. And I had some journey with that was pretty useful. And now I've reclaimed my fear. It's kind of inconvenient. I'm scared of flying. And I fly 30 times a year, at least. And every time I get on the plane now, I'm anxious. And, and I can feel that, and I can be present in my body and ask what it means on a deeper level. And, frankly, just being in the sky is ridiculous, all those you are not scared of flying. So, there's a mixed blessing, but the good side is, like, if I go, oh, I'm scared of losing my partner, or, oh, I'm actually really scared of losing my business, and that's why I'm being a dick as a boss, and I'm, being unpleasant to someone because there's fear underneath that. But, emotions don't matter that much. Let's not pay too much attention to them. Like America's obsessed with emotions, right? You're a therapeutic culture, and everyone's doing therapy all the time on each other in sort of weird confessional way. And I said the other day in a workshop, I said emotions are just how women manipulate each other. And I was mostly joking. But what was clear to me when I said that is I'd sinned. So there's a sacredness to emotion in sort of American personal growth culture. And I think actually, like you were saying before, I think I'm more with you on actions are what matter. People will say things like, I feel uncomfortable with that. And I'm like, so? Well, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter that you feel uncomfortable. Like, who gives a shit? Be uncomfortable. Life is uncomfortable. We're born screaming. The idea that you need to be emotionally comfortable, or the idea that confessing your emotional life is somehow interesting to people, it's boring. Your therapist literally has to be paid to listen to that. So, I mean, I'm being slightly provocative now, but what I'm pointing to is, of course, emotions matter. They're part of embodied experience, but let's not make them too fucking special, please.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I haven't spoken to many, I would say, I guess, folks from the UK who have at least shared their perspective on emotions. Because, I mean, being in the American culture and being very involved in this holistic wellness movement, I agree. I think that there is, and maybe it's because they were suppressed for so long. Now it's doing like this big full generational thing. Yeah. Where now, like, I think, because I feel like the boomer generation was very, I mean, they were the masters of overriding and the masters of masking. And then now there's this huge rebellion almost with Gen Z and millennials too, where it's just like, again, I use the word worship because, I mean, where your attention goes, that's where your priorities are. And it's just like, you see this paralysis almost with this new generation because they're like all these big feelings, we don't know what to do with them. And it's It's wild. It's the Wild West out here.
Well, I mean, it's okay to be emotionally aware. Of course, it's useful
Sure.
as a skill, as long as you can emotionally regulate.
Right,
So, are
right.
we actually capable of emotional regulation? And given
That's
the
it.
destruction of the village, if we're doing all the feeling and expressing, also it's become a kind of new type of fascism. It's because I feel X, you have to do Y, and that logic is not sound. I feel offended, so you have to, I don't know, not wear lipstick, whatever. I can just make some shit up, right? I feel offended by your fairy lights. Actually, you're very nice. All right. So, but what I feel doesn't dictate anything about what you do. It's my feeling. Like I could say, oh, my girlfriend's part Jewish, and if you're a Nazi, you'd be offended, right? Like, so it's irrelevant, right? So it's become a form of control. I mean, effectively, we worked out what toxic masculinity is, but we haven't worked out what toxic femininity is culturally yet. And part of that is using feelings to control. But what's really difficult about a podcast is who am I talking to, right? Because there's someone out there who absolutely needs to hear the opposite message of that. There's someone out there who's like a stiff Dutch business dude. And it's like, for him, it's like, go dancing, talk about your feelings, get in touch with yourself, meditate, tell your wife how you feel, write some love poetry. For him, he needs the opposite message of what I just said. So that's where it's tricky because it all depends on the level of development, the culture, all the situation, the trauma. Someone's trauma is about denying emotion. Someone else's trauma is about splurging it everywhere.
Well said. And it gives me the thought that I would say embodiment is an art, and I'm sure you could agree in your own ways, maybe. Like, whereas art is something that, as an artist, we make something to express, we make something that is meaningful to us, and it could be perceived completely different by someone else depending on their journey. I think that it sounds like it's about, not to sound cliche, but about like finding what works for you. But I think part of maybe the embodiment practice is, I liked what you said where it's like coming home to yourself. It makes me think of gosh, was it Michelangelo that constructed David, where it's like people ask where the idea came from, and it's like I chipped away everything that wasn't him. It wasn't like he had this figure in mind, but it was like he kept chipping away at the crap that wasn't this figure, and then that's what made him perfect. I kind of see ourselves as the same way.
Yeah, that's essentially a beautiful exposition of the sort of central philosophy of what we could call liberalism in the positive sense. That is kind of return to goodness or the stripping away of excess, the original goodness rather than, original sin. I'd say it needs balancing. So it tends to be that left-leaning people or more hippie people have this obsession and they love tribal people who were often monsters. They love children who are often complete fucking idiots. And they love sort of this sense of sort of original goodness. And there's some truth in that. Like if you meditate for long enough, you will meet that sense of like, oh shit, there's a love at the heart of everything. But then there's another side, which is the more conservative side. Which is that we need to have discipline. For example, as a martial artist, you're trained to not panic under pressure. And now your instinct when a bomb goes off is to panic. Is to stress out, to go into a fight or flight response. But if you're in Ukraine with me and the bomb went off, you wouldn't want me panicking. You'd want me cool, calm, and collected. And that's a trainable thing. We train in the martial arts dealing with the stress response. We train with cold showers or breath holding. And the problem is the exact wrong people tend to lean into either side of this. So some people really need to lean into feeling and self-expression and original goodness, whereas other people need to get their shit together. And it's like the people who should do 5 rhythms do karate, and the people that do karate should do 5 rhythms. So, yeah. So one way of looking at it, sort of if you want to take the politics out, because that's always triggering, is simply as skill sets. So which of the embodied skill sets do you need developing? So if I'm training a coach, I'll say, right, this part's strong. You've got that from yoga, or maybe naturally, Savannah, you've kind of just had a talent for a certain shininess or expression or whatever it is. And then, okay, that's great. Keep doing that. In fact, maximize that. That's great. It's good to have a talent. And maybe how can we balance that out? So I send the salsa dancer to martial arts and the martial artist to improv comedy and different things like that in order to balance some of those embodied skill sets out. I like the skill sets model, but I do appreciate your perspective on it as sort of art. There is a way in which our unfolding embodiment is a sort of playful, exploratory work of art. And, I can already tell, I don't know you, but your version of that's going to be very different than my version of that, I would guess.
Maybe we balance each other out. Maybe we're meant to be on each other's journeys.
Well, I mean, more generally, men and women balance each other out. Like our nervous systems are absolutely meant to be together. And, it's not to say there's not other possibilities in the modern world, of course, but men and women are designed to soothe each other. And that's just obvious with my girlfriend. It's like, I'm just a stress head when she's not around. And she's a neurotic bag of worry and anxiety when I'm not around. And it's just like we just soothe each other. This idea that men and women are enemies, that we're not complementary, is just bonkers. Whoever's selling you that, whatever politics they have, is insane. So I don't know. Maybe I just like my mum and sister, but that's the way it seems to me.
No, I completely agree with you. I think that that's something that can be a part. I don't know if you tie that in with the toxic femininity movement or feminism. I don't know what you would associate that with, because maybe it's just more of a embracing the universalism, but I don't know, but I agree with you where I feel like there is this, and maybe it's just the addiction to comfort, like the addiction to, and I say addiction, I mean, I just this, I would say just the resistance to discomfort, whereas like, here's this person that's different, I don't know what to do because they're different, so I'm just gonna push them away, rather than like get curious or try to understand or see how we can balance each other out. I think that there's this whole movement of like, that scares me, that's different, I don't understand it, so it can fuck off. It's like, that's not helpful for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much happier now. I've given up trying to understand women. Like, I'm much happier. Like,
Good, yeah.
not my job.
I don't
Not my job. I mean, don't get me wrong. As a psychologist, it doesn't mean that I don't, for example, I try and understand female trauma or talk to my colleagues to understand the menopause. I mean, those are all, we've had on my podcast many female teachers just, talking about these things. I'm taking notes. That's great. But I think basically just going, okay, there's difference and that's okay, is a beautiful thing. So, yeah, that's been part of my own journey for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. This has been such a fun conversation today. It's just been so great getting to explore, and you definitely have planted a lot of seeds for me to continue to ponder and just meditate on. I really appreciate your perspective and being so open and sharing. I'm curious, if folks would like to learn more about you, how can they find you, get in touch with you, and harass you?
Harass me? How can they harass me on the internet? So if you've been offended by anything I've said today and you're on the internet, I don't give a fuck. So please don't message me. I'm just going to ignore it. I'd say if people want to train, humor and fun is a part of my style. That's partly cultural, it's partly personal. I think the play of things is really important. But if people want to find me, embodimentunlimited.com, embodimentunlimited.com. We have a course for coaches called the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. I have a podcast on there if people like podcasts. We have a free ebook on there. There's lots of free resources and free stuff. And I am on Instagram, not on Tinder or Grindr, but I am on the internet. So embodimentunlimited.com.
Amazing. Thank you. And I'll put the links to everything in the description so it's easy for y'all to get in touch with him. Mark, was there anything that we did not touch upon that you have a burning desire to share? Tap in, connect, and let me know.
Oh, I've just had fun, which is the main thing. I've got 2 interviews in my diary today. I'm kind of tired from a trip, and I was thinking this is going to be boring, but it wasn't, because you're shiny and fun. And this was interesting and engaging, so I hope it was for listeners too. So, yes, I'm glad we had a little dance.
Yes, my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you again so much, Mark. I was just greatly looking forward to it. Did not disappoint, and I can't wait to connect with you more soon. But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you again, everyone, and I will chat with you all later.